So welcome to the Nutritious and Delicious podcast. I'm Bethany Teresa, and I am the owner of Nutritious and Delicious. And today we have a special guest here. We have Teresa, and she's going to be coming in today and talking to you guys all about how to get your kids to eat their veggies. And I'm personally super excited to hear about all these tips because I have two boys myself and I could use the help. So Teresa is actually a plant-based chef, and she's worked with children and families for over 30 years as a doula and also as a nanny. And she's had a passion for making some really tasty recipes that even the pickiest eaters will enjoy. So welcome, Teresa. And I just wanted to ask you just to tell us a little bit more about your business, Little Veg, and what made you want to actually help kids and adults get more vegetables into their daily diet.
Thank you, Bethany. I'm really glad to be here. So I first started with nannying some twins when I was fresh out of college, and I quickly realized that I had a passion for trying to get them to eat as much variety as possible, and so that included vegetables, right? I was just expanding into even my ability to cook for myself because I was just trying so many different foods. And what I realized is that I got so much joy when they were trying new foods and so much joy when they were loving my cooking, and that just kind of expanded into, going to a cooking school and then bringing all of my knowledge into other families that I worked for after that. And then I started a blog because I wanted to be able to find a place where I could put all these recipes that I was making for families, so the families I worked for could cook those recipes also. I never thought it would actually expand further than that. I was just trying to create a database for those families. And then other people started finding the blog and asking for more recipes, and it just kind of went from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I checked out. You have a ton of recipes on there, which is really handy because, as you know, a lot of children, it's really kind of hard to get them to eat their vegetables. And I find myself, I have to sort of mask a few things, or I've actually tried a few of the tips that you've already tried here. So I'm interested to hear the tips that we have going on today. So we're going to give you 5 fun ways to get your kids to eat their veggies. And I'm going to get Teresa to give us our number 1 tip right now.
So the first thing I want to preface this with is I think of this in my mind as something I call vegetable immersion. So really, I'm getting vegetables to show up every meal as often as possible. I'm just kind of flooding our lives with vegetables so that they become just kind of, they're just always there. So there's never this kind of push to try to get them to eat vegetables, because it's just kind of like, well, of course there's vegetables in our life. Why wouldn't there be, right? Yeah. It's like, if you get through your whole day and you only think of a vegetable at dinner, and then all of a sudden it's this push for your child to eat the vegetable because it's the only time it's showing up during the day, you're losing all these opportunities for vegetables to show up that you might not even think of. So the first tip is just get vegetables to show up in unexpected places, times when you wouldn't even think of it, because the children that I've been able to serve vegetables to in the morning with breakfast, for some reason, breakfast is a time when I've gotten them to eat more vegetables. And most people don't even think about serving vegetables with breakfast. So I'll lightly blanch some green beans, or I'll, throw some raw sugar snap peas on the table, or, whatever you think of that's super simple, easy for you to just get them on the table. Just start having them show up all the time.
That's a great way, actually. I never thought about it in terms of breakfast first. With my boys, you can get them sort of into smoothies and things like that. It's sort of to try one and see if you like it, if you don't. And I always notice that they change sort of as well. And I find when you said the breakfast thing, it made me think it's probably because most of the time children are actually hungry from fasting the night before. So they're more keen on actually eating versus we get to the dinner table and everyone's kind of already had their fill of snacks and treats and things, and the vegetables come out and you're like, oh no, this boring vegetables coming out. That's when kids, I think, are dreading dinner, or adults are dreading dinner. And that's a great tip because it stops the fight coming to dinner and the dread of that dinner time. So what's your number 2 tip now?
So serve foods as components. So instead of, I do a lot of component meals. So I'll spend about an hour, maybe twice a week, just making a bunch of really simple dishes that I kind of think of as components. So I make a red cabbage dish where I just do red cabbage and a little bit of vinegar and cook it until it's just a little tender. They love that. Or, just all sorts of really simple dishes, a tofu, like just baked tofu, or, just a simple black bean dish. And then you can use these as components for your meals as they're coming up. So you can pull them for lunches or for dinners. And, an example would be of a component meal would be like quinoa, black beans, blanched green beans, and maybe, a dressing or condiments with that to kind of spice it up. But children don't always like to have, these one pot meals or these like casseroles, because a lot of, especially young children, they like to be able to have all of their food kind of separate, and so then they can pick and choose. So maybe one meal they'll only eat quinoa and sweet potato, which is totally, that's fine. And then the next meal they might choose avocado and black beans, and it gives them some agency in choosing their foods. And it, I think as a child we all remember, grandma serving her, casserole that had mushrooms in it, and maybe we couldn't stand mushrooms, and so then that was the only meal. And then what do you do if you're a kid and you hate mushrooms, and suddenly there's this meal in front of you that you don't even, it's like not a good feeling.
I find with my boys right now, again, what you said about a lot of kids, like their food sort of separated, like they can tell if it's a mushroom, they can tell if it's like cabbage or, a cucumber or something, and they don't like things together sometimes. I've noticed that as well, like the way we cook food, certainly. Sometimes they'll eat like the cherry tomatoes, but they won't have it on something else. Or I could put it like the tomato paste on like a pizza, like a homemade pizza, and they'll eat it that way. So I've noticed that it's kind of the way maybe you cook it. Or another one that's worked really well for us is like tacos. So because what you said about the separating, when I actually put like the peppers, the onions, chives, or things like that, the meat separately, and then they can put it in themselves. Sometimes they may put the lettuce in, and other times they may use the tomatoes. So I find that really helps, instead of me just kind of putting everything together and then they're like, oh, I don't want to eat this, and they start picking it apart. So I find that
I love those kinds of meals. I do a lot of grain bowls where there's a base, but then they can put all the things on top that they want, and then there'll be all these components in front of them. Or burritos, similar to tacos. That's
a really good idea with kids, I find, because it's also the creativity, and I know that's kind of another point that you have, but the creativity, I think, of them doing it themselves. One thing I had for my 3-year-old, it took him a really long time to eat salad, and finally I got him to actually put the salad together with me. Like I chopped it, and then I said, here, like you put what you want in there, and I gave him the dressing. And as soon as he did it himself and then ate the dressing and ate the vegetables, he's like, I actually like it. I think it's because he had sort of the ability to take those ingredients and put them together, versus mom just putting it all in a bowl, and he doesn't really want it all together, right? So I find that was really helpful to get him to eat some sort of a salad. So that's a great tip. What's your third tip?
Third tip is to make creamy pureed vegetable soups. So, you can make a really simple, I'm all about simple recipes, because we really just don't have time when we're taking care of kids to pull together these elaborate meals.
And a lot of them don't.
A lot of simple, one simple soup recipe is this creamy pureed soup, and I put like chopped one onion in the bottom of the pot, and then I'll add like chopped up winter squash, or chopped up sweet potato or carrot, any sweet vegetable that you can think of that you think your child likes in other capacities too. And then add some broth or stock up to about 3/4 of the level of the vegetable. And then, bring it to a boil, turn it down to simmer, let it cook until the vegetable's soft. And then if you have an immersion blender, which is amazing, then you don't even need to dirty your blender. So stick your immersion blender in, and then puree it until it's creamy. And then taste it, and you can add more seasonings if you want. A light miso is really nice in there. a little shoyu. You can add some sea salt if you feel like the broth wasn't quite salty enough. And then you can add some herbs if your children don't mind, chopped green things in their soup. And then I'll add some toppings at the table that they can choose from. So you can pan fry, cut bread into cubes, which is really nice as a kind of a crunchy topping for a soup. You could do toasted seeds and nuts. You can do, there's a sprinkle that you can make with nutritional yeast and seeds or nuts where you put it in a grinder and add a little sea salt to that, and it makes kind of like a yummy, savory kind of sprinkle for things. So that's a really nice way to get kids to eat some vegetables sometimes. And also, sometimes I can vary the way that I'm serving something. So if it's a sweet, creamy pureed soup, you can put it in a cup with a straw, and sometimes children will drink their soup as if it, was kind of a smoothie rather than, in a bowl. So try different things.
That's actually a really good idea because I find the fruits a lot easier. Like when I think of sort of puree fruits and vegetables, like smoothies go really down like well with us because they're sweet and they're pureed. I try to sometimes sneak vegetables in there. But when it comes to the vegetable ones, it's a little bit harder. We're struggling with the eldest. He doesn't like a lot of soup. So like kind of the brothy soups with the vegetables like as whole in them. So taking that tip is actually a really good idea to puree because he loves broccoli. So I could actually try like a broccoli puree soup. He would really like that. Or like a butternut squash. And then, I like the idea of the nutritional yeast, or like I make sometimes like croutons and stuff as well for like their salad to get them to eat it, which is a really good idea. So even just that idea of like having them to be able to sprinkle their own thing on top of, their soup and putting it in a cup, or, it makes it so much more interesting, and it's like playing with their food basically. So that's an awesome tip. I love that. What's your number 4 tip then?
Is to create a story with your meals. So this works a little bit better with kind of the 7 and under set. It's not, I don't know, maybe you have a super creative 10-year-old and it works with them
an adult.
But,
Yeah.
But one example would be to cut green beans kind of in this, kind of short shape, and you can get them to stand up on the plate so they become little people, and maybe they can jump in, they could jump into that sweet, creamy pureed soup, and you can call it the swimming pool. And then after they jump in the swimming pool, then they hop in your mouth, and you can have them, talk and create stories and like, oh, I'm going to go join my friend,
Yeah.
And that can really help for kids. They love it if you have something kind of flat, like a square of nori or a little blanched collard leaf or something, and then you can put other toppings in there. So it's almost like you're using that as a tortilla, except it's like a mini kind of version, like a kid-sized version, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can put a little rice in there and maybe a little avocado and kind of roll it up into a little nori taco, or into a little, you can pretend a blanched carrot is a baby, and you put the baby in the blanket and you roll it up, and so all sorts of, just get really creative.
It's funny because I'm hearing the difference between a little bit like boys and girls. Like the girls would probably enjoy wrapping the baby up into the nori blanket, and I'm thinking of my boys at the table, and what we did with the broccoli was like they're the T-Rex and there's little trees around, and it's just like rawr, so it's interesting
Totally.
How we even got the boys like the knives and forks that look like the construction. So when they use it, it looks like a digger or something like that. So
love those.
Yeah, that works really well. I would be interested to see if girls kind of play with their food differently, like the wrapping up of the baby. My boys would probably just laugh and be like, I'm eating the baby, kind of thing, or whatever.
Oh yeah, I do with boys too. They just have a different experience.
Yeah. But no, that's great.
Whatever,
I like that.
Knowing your child too, right? So you know what interests them, and so you can pull the story out of what, maybe it was a story you read earlier, and then suddenly you're making, your spoon a train, and then you.
That's wonderful. I love that.
Or on the building supplies and take it to the construction site.
Well, it's even when you think about babies, right? When you say like, open the garage or something, like, and you press their nose and you try and get them to open up their mouth. and even as like little babies, like they always play with their food. I remember that with my boys, they were using their hands all the time. And that's where I think just the little pieces of food and different pieces of like different textures really help as well. Because I think sometimes it's not always a taste thing for little kids. It's also a texture. Like they might like the taste of it, but they're spitting it out because they don't like the consistency of it. So different things like that. That's amazing. So what's our last and final tip here?
So the last one kind of goes right along with what you just mentioned about needing different textures. It's about really doing research on your own child. So think of yourself as kind of this scientist doing research, and you're unattached to the, whatever you're studying, and unattached to the information you get. But when you sit down at a meal, you're asking child questions. You're learning about, which textures do they like? Which ones do they not like? Which flavors do they like? Which ones do they not like? And really, starting that conversation so that then you're learning more about, my child doesn't like the texture of sweet, creamy, pureed soups. They don't like pureed things. They would much rather have a brothy soup with chunks of vegetables and all the vegetables they can identify, right? So some children would rather have, a pureed tomato sauce, and you can hide a ton of vegetables in there. Other children want to be able to actually know what they're putting in their mouth.
Yeah.
So you keep asking questions, and then you kind of, I think of it as kind of like this research scientist, but also a food critic too. So you're having conversations with them about, when you taste something, you're talking about, I think I added a little bit too much vinegar, or I think this needed a little more salt, or, this is what I would do differently. What do you think? And so you're always just keeping this open conversation. And, even going so far as keeping this little notebook on the table where you're writing down, what were the 5-star meals, or, I had a child recently tell me that they actually don't like, a vegetable stir fry where all the vegetables are together. They preferred having all their vegetables separate, whereas another child would love to have that stir fry. So really getting to know your child.
Definitely. Too. Yeah. I find with the children, like trying to keep away like your opinion in a sense, I think, because trying to get them to try new things, like say you don't like a vegetable and then you're like, oh, this is gross. And then you're like, here, you want to try it? They're like, no. So whenever what I used to do when they were little was if I was chopping up a vegetable, I usually buy like a new vegetable probably every week or so, just to see, like, I like to try new things myself. But I would chop it and I'd either be cooking it, like if it needed to be cooked, or if it was raw. And I would offer it to them as I was cooking it and say, like, here, do you want to try this? And they usually would ask, like, well, what is it? I'm like, just try it first. And then if they liked it, and they'd be like, I'm not sure, I don't like it. And I usually would say, like, do you want that with your food? Or, yeah, I really like that. And then when we do actually have dinners and I've added new foods or done it like a different recipe, I usually say, like, do you really like this? And they'll say, like, yeah or no, like, do you want me to make it again? So obviously, like, when they're quiet and eating, I usually know that it's really good. So typically, like, we'll use it again. So again, it's kind of like an experiment, because not every recipe, not every dinner you're going to cook is going to be like, the 5-star and everyone's going to love it. Like, everyone has different tastes in the family. And I think that's where a lot of moms have problems, because they're kind of like, what can I make that everyone's going to eat? And it's not going to be like a crazy fight at the dinner table. Like, what we do sometimes ourselves, me and my partner, is that we'll make something and then put the kids' food aside and add it to something else, and not make like 2 separate meals, but just maybe add a different side. Just that way we're not making like 2 different kind of meals. Or we'll make something and say, like, take out the tomatoes or the mushrooms, like we know they don't like, and ask, do you guys want this on the side or something? So we kind of give them a little bit more of their own way of doing it, versus us kind of saying, like, no, you have to eat it. And then it becomes like a big battle at the table, right? So I'm sure.
I love that.
Do you see a lot of parents struggling with that, like the dinner time table, vegetable issue going on?
Yeah, I think part of it is, we might be creating a meal and we're not thinking about all the members of the household. We're just trying to get whatever we can think of that's fast, that we can just get it on the table.
Yeah.
And part of what the benefit of these component dishes that I'm talking about is that you could even, make your regular meal that you're thinking about making. And if you have something that you can pull into that meal, like whether it's plain rice or whether it's a sweet potato or, something that shows up at the table so that there is something that your child does like to eat. And so maybe they're not going to eat the main dish, but you are providing some healthy things. But because you're pulling them, you're not creating a whole different meal for them. You're just pulling a few components out of the fridge so that you always have something that's going to be, appealing to the child. And if they choose not to eat, then they choose not to eat. Don't panic about it either. They're not going to starve. They're going to eat when they're hungry.
Kids are actually very intuitive eaters. And actually having worked myself in the diet and health industry as a nurse back in the day, I noticed a lot of people who were coming in very heavy and overweight. We talked a lot about like the clean plate club, basically. So these adults have been pushed as children to eat things that they do not like, and they had a lot of bad experiences with it. And so it's almost like they've developed these mindset problems around food, vegetables, and they're really picky as adults because of it. So I've noticed that like if you start pushing kids to eat certain things, then they start avoiding it more and you start to have more of a battle. And that's where like, say if my boys don't eat, the full dinner, say there's quite more than half left, we wrap it up, put it in the fridge and say, okay, you can have it like later, tomorrow, lunch, whatever. And then if they don't eat it the next day, like we'll throw it out. But other than that, like we don't waste food unless, it's something they really don't want. And sometimes even the other sibling is like, I like that. Can I have it? So it's just kind of being a little bit more open and not rigid with kids. Cause we have to remember, we've also grown up with tapes as children, and we're also putting that onto our children too. So an example would be like, there's starving kids in Africa and all this stuff, right? And then you're passing that on to your kids and putting that on them. So, that's where I'm very neutral at the table with the food in our house, just because of all the tapes I've seen and obviously the way everyone's grown up, right? And it can wreck adults' mindset around food, and it becomes like, turns into like eating disorders, binge eating, all that kind of stuff. So I've seen the other end of, pushing people in the wrong direction too. So that was,
you want the meals to be fun and relaxing.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want them to be stressful. What happens to our digestion when we're stressed out? It's hard to eat. It's hard to, we don't absorb our food well. And it's just not pleasant. And, the dinner table is a place where you can really connect as a family. And so if it becomes stressful and, this meeting of the wills, you're losing this chance to really connect with your children.
Definitely. And it is. It's a family time. It's time for everyone to sit and relax. And again, yes, like you don't want people to be tense and running around with food and all this kind of stuff. And it's not, it's not a place of a battle, right? It's a place of just being neutral and asking each other, like what we usually do is we go around the table and ask what each of us are grateful for that day. And I've been doing that at an early age with the boys, because then they're kind of sitting and relaxing and telling us about their day and what they're grateful for. So I really enjoyed your tips. So thank you so much for coming on today for our podcast, Teresa. So you lovely ladies, if you're looking for some really good veggie tips and recipes, then I'm actually going to leave Teresa's link here in the notes, because you can actually join and subscribe to her newsletter for more tips and recipes. She's got a lot of them. And also for you lovely ladies, if you're wanting to start to take better care of your health and happiness, so the whole family can benefit, because obviously a healthy family starts with a healthy parent, like we talked about at the end of the day, then you can join our Nutritious and Delicious 6-month mummy memberships. And that will be at www.ndelish.com. And I will also leave that link for you here in the show notes. So thank you so much again for coming in, Teresa. And I'm really excited to see all these. I can use them myself as well. So I'm really excited to see all these work out with my boys as well. So I hope you ladies have a wonderful week, and I will see
Oh, I
you.
had an offer too for.
Oh, you do? Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have an offer. So I have, if you sign up to my newsletter, then you'll get 10 ways to make meals fun, which is great because that's just what we were talking about, is how to help make the mealtime a little less stressful and more relaxing. So.
That's great. So that's what you will get for signing up to your email list. So that's amazing. And a lot of parents need that. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Bethany.
Oh, you're welcome.